What's going on, guys? Unknown Player here, and today we're going to be talking about some more interesting topics, but mainly the big question of Siva. Where is it? How come there aren't any Siva-fied Fallen? And how it ties into the lore of Destiny 2. If you don't know, there was a lot of confirmation that Siva would be inside Destiny 2 that I covered a couple months back when the game was being announced, and obviously it isn't in the actual game. So today we're going to be covering all the evidence of how we know Siva is in the game, and more importantly how it's going to be introduced, because there are a couple interesting story details that kind of explain what's going on here. So let's begin with some absolute confirmation that Siva-fied Fallen were supposed to be inside Destiny 2. So The Independent had an interview with several Bungie employees, and when talking about the enemies in the game, they talked about Cabal Red Legion and explained them. They also said Destiny 2 will also reintroduce 5 additional enemy races throughout the campaign and adventures that unfold on each of our 4 new worlds. So they said it clear as day, the Cabal Red Legion plus 5 reintroduced enemy races, totaling 6 of course. So it should be the Cabal, Fallen, Hive, Vex, Taken, and Siva-fied Fallen. There's no way to misinterpret that quote. They aren't talking about Callus's army, they aren't talking about DLC. They said in the 4 worlds, so at launch, there are 6 different enemy races, all of them reintroduced, meaning they were in Destiny 1, meaning the Splicers, so they should be included there. So it is really unfortunate, to be honest. I'm guessing this is another example of cut content they're saving for a DLC. It is also possible they scrap the idea altogether to do something else, but I think it's a lot more likely we'll just see it later on. So let's talk about Siva and how it's actually written into this game, because we do get a fairly good idea of how it's going to appear, and there's a lot of interesting stuff hidden around the place. So it seems that initially in development, the early version of the Exodus Crash Strike that we all know and love and hate was actually initially going to be a Siva-fied Fallen, believe it or not. So if you've been watching my channel since the reveal, you remember this screenshot from a Destiny 2 trailer showing an unfinished menu of the Nightfall Strike on Nessus. You can see the Arcadian Valley at the bottom left there. But the description says that Siva Corrupted Fallen have made their nest inside a crash ship. We cannot allow Siva to gain a foothold here. Of course, there is a typo there. It says next instead of nest. And we know that crash ship it mentions is the Exodus Black, controlled by FAILSAFE. So now is the question of why is Siva on her ship in the first place? Well, this actually goes back to the Golden Age and the Exodus program. So this was the process of sending colony ships to colonize other worlds. These are the exact same ones you'll see all over the Cosmodrome, those giant ships with the 3 big pods. You might remember they made a Crucible map around Exodus Blue in Destiny 1. That was just one of many ships. There's also the Exodus Red, which never got to take off because of the collapse and the darkness attacking. And there's also, of course, the Exodus Black, which did take off, but crashed on Nessus because of its irregular orbit and the Vex transforming it. So Nessus out of nowhere basically appeared in the flight path, causing it to crash there. So the Exodus Black had Siva on it because it's a technology used to colonize planets and build matter. That is what Siva does. It can basically create anything depending on how it's programmed. In Rise of Iron, we then found out that it wasn't programmed correctly, and Rasputin was able to use it as a weapon against the Iron Lords, who it thought was a threat, and then that weaponized version of Siva was then used by the Fallen. So that is why Siva is on the Exodus Black, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be weaponized in the very evil version, but of course it's very possible that it could be manipulated again. So you can also see this concept art of Nessus showing the Exodus Black with Siva logos all over it, and also Siva itself growing everywhere. It's actually not contained. You can see the red cables coming out of it, and this was the initial idea, as well as the Nightfall Strike against Siva Fallen being here. But then of course in the final game, Siva hasn't actually been outbroken. It's still contained within the Exodus Black. Now, the weird thing about the boss of this strike is that it does seem that he is actually a splicer, not a Siva-fied one, of course, but if you don't know, every single Fallen house in the game does have their own splicers. These are pretty much evil scientists that mess with technology, so if you see any Fallen with mechanical limbs, augmentations, like Tanix Asgard, the old strike boss, also Varix, this guy as well, these are all splicers and examples of splicer technology with the mechanical limbs and augmentations. So splicers are pretty much everywhere in all Fallen houses, but when the splicers of the House of Devils got their hands on Siva, they became the Devil Splicers that we know. So in Destiny 2, whenever Siva does get introduced, it's likely they won't be the Devil Splicers, but instead the new purple Fallen house, which of course are called the House of Dusk, so they might be called the DuskSplicers unless Bungie comes up with a different name for them. It's also worth noting that the strike description doesn't say Devil Splicers, it just says Corrupted Fallen, so that proves my point that we've only seen what Siva does to the Devils, but we have no idea what might happen if a different Fallen house, like the Dusk, gets their hands on it instead. Now, even though Siva was obviously cut from this game, there are still plenty of references to it in the same strike and elsewhere as well, mainly on Nessus. FAILSAFE does say how there's a node on her ship called the Siva Project, but it's heavily encrypted so nobody, not even herself, can access it. So she is saying directly there is Siva on her ship, but right now it's locked away. Sometimes when you start the Exodus Crash Strike, you're going to get a dialogue of Cade talking about it, which I'll play for you now.
There's the scam. The Fallen are trashing the Exodus Black. It's the back part, a chunk of shit FAILSAFE hasn't seen in years. You remember Siva, right? Fallen with Golden Age tech seems like a super bad idea.
Yeah, didn't Siva kill the Iron Lords?
Saladin still talks about you, Wolfie. You got this.
So it's pretty weird because in the early versions it seems that Fallen had already gotten their hands on Siva. The description said they were already corrupted, but in the final game Bungie almost rewinded it to before they got their hands on it, and it's kind of hinting they will soon. Something I found that was even more interesting is a really hidden and out of the way scannable on Nessus, which I'll play for you.
I think they're running a test to see if they can get this thing to self-replicate. And failing, thank goodness. If the Vex were able to manipulate matter that easily, we'd be in a lot more trouble.
So I thought this is pretty strange because it's actually hinting at the possibility of the Vex getting their hands on Siva. Apparently they are trying to get this thing to self-replicate. I think it's an oracle or some kind of piece of Vex technology. They're trying to get it to self-replicate, and there is only one place in all of Destiny we've heard the term self-replicate a million times. That is of course Siva. It also mentions how if the Vex could manipulate matter, which is by definition of what Siva does, it self-replicates, and it manipulates matter to create anything. So this scanner was 100% relating to Siva, and kind of saying, imagine if the Vex could get their hands in it, we'd be in a lot of trouble, it'd be really bad. There's also a similar one with the ghost mentioning how it looks a bit like Siva, and now he hopes we'll never see it again. So there's definitely a lot going on to do with Siva and Nessus, and it's written pretty thoroughly into the lore, especially with the Exodus Black ship. There's a ton of hints all over the game with it. Even though that Vex scannable does definitely hint towards Siva, I think it's a lot more likely we'll see it with the Fallen, because we know they've already made content for it, they had plans, so the Osiris DLC is going to be Vex focused. It makes it a lot more likely the spotlight will be on the Fallen in the future with Siva. Now, with the PC audio files that recently came out, Lakshmi does mention the Devils being in the Cosmodrome. Now, this could be the regular House of Devils, or it could very well be the DuskSplicers with Siva. The Cosmodrome is a very likely place we would encounter it because it's where it originates. I mean, Bungie could just make up anything and write a story that some still does exist. So we have no idea what could happen there. All we know is that it is contained. The second expansion is going to be based on a war mine. So even though my theory is that we are going to go to Mars for Charlemagne, maybe part of it has us going to the Cosmodrome to encounter Siva again, with Rasputin maybe. But those PC files are pretty concrete, especially the ones of us returning to the original locations, like the Cosmodrome. But we still don't know how Bungie might have changed their minds on where the story is going, because we know a lot of stuff in those files are very irrelevant and old now, like Myriad, for example, which is just an early version of Nessus. So I do think because of all the in-game hints that Siva will be unleashed from the Exodus Black on Nessus. But of course, let me know all of your thoughts and theories down below in the comment section. What do you think is going to happen with Siva, and where do you think we're going to encounter it? So as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did and want to help support the channel, then a like rating down below would be much appreciated. You can click the image on screen right now to be taken to another Destiny 2 video I recently made, and I'll see you guys in the next one.